using the 2050 carbon calculator. So throughout the webinar, you'll get to learn what the 2050 calculator does and what it can do in your decarbonization work in Tanzania. It will be majorly focused on the work that has already been done in Kenya with lessons learned and also some bit of the way forward after this webinar. We'll have 4 guests give their remark. I'll be your moderator for today. So my name is Thomas Bundi. I work at Strathmore University as their quality engineer, as well as a researcher and trainer. At Strathmore, we do research consultancy, testing, and training in renewable energy in the region. Our first speaker will be Peter Dobora, who works with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum in Kenya. He'll give his remarks. We also have Mr. David Orr, the country lead Kenya for the 2050 calculator program. He works with Mott MacDonald. We'll also have Dr. Ivan Uremi, who is a consultant working with Energy Research Center. He's an energy specialist, researcher, and lecturer with 10 years experience in Sub-Saharan Africa, working in renewable energy. And we'll also have Dr. Betsy Morethi Ochieng, a research fellow at iLab Africa. She was part of the team that delivered the Kenya 2050 calculator, and her current research projects include developing machine learning tools for decision support and modeling public health resources. That is the brief introduction. Now I'd like to hand over to Peter Dobora to give his opening remark.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Dobora, and I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you, Peter.
My connectivity is not good. I'm traveling. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to have some highlights on the calculator 2050 in Kenya. We started our program in the year 2021, and we took around 11 months to complete the development of the tool with a lot of training, a lot of work, a lot of meetings, workshops, and so on. The calculator is a tool that is good for any country because it is a platform for policymakers, decision makers, and administrators to co-design and develop and build, local-based solutions to climate, energy, and land issues. In our calculator, we did have some priorities, and we had 6 sectors of the economy that we did have our look at. And this is to ensure that we do not leave any sector behind. The ones that are very relevant was electricity, industry, carbon dioxide removal and gases, building, transport, land use, bioenergy, and waste to energy. Those are the 6 sectors that we really did prioritize. The calculator is a tool that allow us to address or answer some fundamental issues in our climate change work. It looks at how the demands for example, renewable energy will be satisfied in the future, and the impact it has on the population at individual level, corporate, and even at the government level in terms of behavior change. Like maybe you look at how do you mitigate reduction of the use of the fossil fuels in our transport, for example, other sectors, to ensure that we reduce the emission reduction. As I said, the calculator for our calculator has a local title. It's called KCERT. That is Kenya Carbon Emission Reduction Tool 2050. So we are able to adopt that name so that it is localized. And then we look at how maybe the use of fossil fuels, the ones that we may need now and in the future, and maybe the importations, and maybe a bit of how it will impact on our carbon emissions. We also look at the impact of the improved forest management on emissions because forest management acts as a sink for carbon dioxide. Then we look at the best pathways which will achieve net zero emissions targets and the impact of maybe delaying the action. Our net zero target is that the reduction by 32% emissions of GHG based on business as usual by the year 2030. Then we look at how we also look at how we can reduce emissions with high levels of economic growth and how this cost will come in. The calculator that we came up with, the tool, may not look at cost on its own, but it is possible to improve it in the future, or even the data from it, so that you can do a bit of optimization, because the tool is basically an engineering tool, but not for the purpose of optimizing. You also look at the diversity of the energy supply by the year 2050 and how this will meet our demands for the future, of the country. So the tool basically is to help us, the users. Users include government, businesses, academia, and individuals, to understand the wide range of possible energy pathways available to the country as Kenya develops its green growth transition. Also, it will provide quantities of energy demand, supply, emissions, and potential implications for key sectors in Kenya on issues such as import dependence and land requirements. It's also offer a platform to facilitate policy debate about the possible future pathways for Kenyan energy sector and enable potential policy interventions for deeper analysis. Also, it will help planning to meet Kenya's updated national determined contribution of 32% as per our target for the, as we committed for the GHG emissions by the year 2030. And this will to help attain this target, the calculator will support Kenya to undertake multi-sectoral planning. Maybe to touch on our experiences as we are developing the calculator, one of the issues was to ensure that we don't leave any sector or subsector behind. We were able to look at our country, the whole broad spectrum of the energy sector and the needs and the emissions that are existing and projected. And we worked with the sector as a whole, both government, private sector, and also maybe the academia. One of the key issues that we looked at was we were able to identify key sector reads through the consultant, sector reads for each sector, so that sector read is the one that would guide the discussions, the data corrections, and the data, maybe where to get the data and how to do the analysis, so that none of the sectors is left behind. And the key sector lead had a role to ensure that they did not leave out any other component of the subsector out of the 6 sectors. And for our case, and I think Tanzania may not be different, we targeted the sector lead to be in the public sector because we felt the need to get a buy-in, because if you don't do it using the public sector, data from the public sector is actually data that is certified, that is available, and data that is credible. So maybe that's an area, maybe our brothers across the border can look at. In addition to the sector read, we covered the whole spectrum, both public, private, and academia, to ensure that all were represented. In our country, stakeholder engagement is not a wish, is a requirement in our constitution, so that we had to really ensure that all the stakeholders were in place and we engaged them. We worked with them to develop the tool. We even worked with them to validate the tool and to ensure that the data collected is credible, it is acceptable, and no one can say that it is not Kenyan. So it is purely a Kenyan tool developed by Kenyans for the use by Kenyans. And it's a tool that is good because it will support us as we move towards net zero emission as per the target. So we also ensured we involved all the major public sector entities either ministries or state departments, all our corporations or agencies that have an impact on each of the sector and the subsector, so that they provided the insight, they provided the data, they also provided the expertise so that we could get a buy-in. And of course, we work very closely with our Minister of Environment so that we are in tandem, because our calculator may have an impact as we move towards maybe our long-term strategy that we have been working on the part of the environment, protection. So it is my wish that maybe my experiences and what I've mentioned may also be good for our neighbors, so that they can get a tool that is purely local developed, locally owned, and they use the local expertise to ensure that none is left behind. And I was the coordinator, I've been the coordinator for the tool, for the national coordinator to develop the tool, as well as to support and integrate all the sectors that we had selected. In our environment, the way we work with maybe what we call the interministerial maybe group or committees that we are now in the process of now establishing for implementation, because we have now developed the tool. We are now in this next phase for developing. So it's my wish and my prayer that our experiences will also be of value to our brothers and sisters in Tanzania, because you learn from others. You look at the good things, and what may not be a challenge, you will also try to avoid. So it's my pressure, and maybe I submit here and leave the conveners to continue with the program. I may also beg to exit because I'm traveling. I have to go to the airport in a short while. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon. Maybe later, if I sit down before 5, I'll catch up on the discussions. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Peter. We appreciate your time and giving us some insights on what was the experience on the Ministry of Energy side. Now, I would like to invite David Orr to give his remarks as well as the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas, and thank you very much, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm David Orr. I'm the country manager for the 2050 calculator program in Kenya. And I think just very briefly, I wanted to just touch upon what the focus of the program is, and how excited we are to have Kenya join the ranks of about 60 other countries as well, which have their own calculators, helping them develop their own decarbonization pathways. It's exciting, it's inclusive, it's evidence-backed, and as always, we're looking to see how this can be extended to other countries in the region. And so towards the end of the presentation, we'll also be sharing, of course, the lessons, but also how to get involved, how to build your own calculator as well, and take it forward. But I think it's worth saying that it's a unique tool. It's a unique tool in the sense that it's stakeholder backed. It's very transparent, and so it's intended to be open source and interactive. And so we're thrilled that there's these 60 countries around the world which now have them. We even have it at a city level as well, to really be able to support a wide range of countries and governments to build out their decarbonization pathways. And so if we just go briefly to the next slide, we can see what we developed in Kenya over the last couple of years. And I think it's really exciting to build upon what Peter mentioned there, that over 200 stakeholders were consulted. This ranged from energy transmission companies in Kenya to Kenya Airways to universities to NGOs. It was very, very broad. And part of this is also ensuring that we have the support of the key organizations that are involved. So that's the funding from the UK government, the anchoring of the calculator in the Ministry of Energy, and then the support from the consortium. So Macdonald and Imperial, but most of all, it's about that support and the building, which came from our downstream partner, Strathmore University, who really did the hard yards in this. And I think what's exciting too is just exploring how we can make this as targeted to the Kenyan context as possible. And I think, as this gets built out potentially in Tanzania and other countries in the region, that there's a focus on how it can be adapted to the regional context. And so I think it's really exciting that, it's designed in Kenya. Kenyan data that's on there, and it's made for Kenyans. And I think that's just the future of where we're looking at decarbonization. Is it has to be locally led, but with very much a global focus as well. So it's been a real privilege to be part of this program, and excited to share more lessons as we go through. And just before we do, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Onesmus Mbonje for a couple of words as well. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm Onesmus Mwabonje, a research fellow at Imperial College London. I'm also a visiting researcher at Strathmore University in Kenya. I'm Kenyan, and I'm very proud that we've been able to develop a tool that will be quite useful in terms of fostering decarbonization strategies, not just for the government, but also for other sectors as well in Kenya. If we want to decarbonize the world, it is important that we come together and we work together. It's tools like this, the KCERT that has been developed, that will help to foster breaking down silos between various organizations, various state departments, in order to discuss and stimulate that discussion towards a decarbonized world. I'm proud that we have built capacity in East Africa through Strathmore, through the state departments in Kenya, that will go a long way in also building capacity across East Africa as a whole. So thank you very much, and please ask as many questions as you'd like to know today, as we continue to sensitize you on the 2050 calculator world. Thank you very much, and now hand over to Betsy.
Thank you, Dr. Onesmus and David O for the introductions, as well as Peter Thobora. So I'll just take you through a short introduction to KCERT 2050. So if you can move the slides. Yes, so KCERT is a modeling tool. And like Peter Thobora said that it is an engineering tool that models the situation as it is. And then it uses scenario analysis to look at different pathways for decarbonization and their impact in terms of reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions, as well as sectoral greenhouse gas emissions and different means of energy consumption. It was highly supported by expert stakeholder engagement, different activities to forecast and quantify carbon emissions. So at the heart of the tool is in-depth sectoral, so it was built with a lot of sector engagement. So the structure of the 2050 carbon calculator, it takes an entire system analysis, so it doesn't look at energy generation. If you can go to the next slide. But it looks at the entire system. We model six sectors, so transport, industry, buildings, land use, and carbon emission reduction. So it looks at how the demography, economic, and lifestyle assumptions that are currently present in the Kenyan economy, and those ones go to specify the demand input needed for the analysis of carbon emission measurement. And then from the demand, we look at different technologies, energy generation and resources. So what are the technologies that are currently in use that are consuming energy, and what are the types of energy supplies that we have? So look at the demand and supply and how this impacts carbon emissions. And then that goes to dictate, can we have different scenarios to reduce energy supply and to reduce and renewable energy demand, but also reduce the burning of fossil fuels, and different lifestyle pathways that can be used to reduce carbon emissions. There are 3 levels of complexity for the audience. So there are 3 different tools, more or less to different degree of detail. So the My 2050 is a school-based, it's a simplified animation of the web tool and Excel sheet that it can be used for the general public and students. So we are still implementing that. The web tool is the front-end version of the Excel spreadsheet. So can be used by policymakers, stakeholders, and well-informed public. And then much deeper, with much more complexity, we have the Excel spreadsheet that now models the different requirements, and that can be used by technical experts and stakeholder experts. So as you move up, you have higher complexity, but also just depends on the time you have to interact with the tool itself. So what are the typical questions being explored by the calculators? If you can move on to the next slide. So the key questions we are looking to answer using the tool is that what are the possible scenarios to reach net zero emission in 2050? So with the tool, you have the business as usual pathway with the usual rate of carbon emissions, and then you have different levels that demonstrate different scenarios for abatement and reduction of carbon emission, greenhouse gas emission. And so you can use the tool to simulate different scenarios to reach net zero in 2050. Another question you can answer is, how do existing national scenarios compare with potential alternative scenarios? So can you be more ambitious with some of these scenarios? So let's say we have the set national scenarios. Can this be tweaked a little bit more and then see the impact in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? And then you can also look at how do current climate targets compare to feasible ambition levels. So compare what are the current climate targets and what is feasibly available to the country. And then lastly, you can look at what are the key additional levels to reach or go beyond these targets. So you have the set targets, either the NDCs or the climate targets set at the country level, but can they go further? Can we look at different alternatives? And how do they combine in terms of the net zero, towards reaching net zero? So those are the main questions that can be explored using the calculator. Moving on to tool development. So there was an 8-step plan for the development of the KCERT 2050. So the first was to engage the sector leads to think about what are the different drivers for each sector and what are the different scenarios for each sector. So what drives energy consumption for each sector? What are the demand? What are the lifestyle assumptions? And then they draw up what you call a driver tree. So that shows how different lifestyle choices, different energy consumption, energy utilization lead up to greenhouse gas emissions. And then they go ahead and draft what we called a one-pager that kind of explains the sector in terms of their energy consumption, the different assumptions that they have, what are the scenarios for abatement and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And then the next step was to come up with a list of inputs and then carry out a stakeholder workshop. I think for KCERT, we carried about maybe 5 stakeholder workshops throughout the year that it was being developed. So getting their input in terms of, do the assumption make sense? Is this the current scenario within the country? And then once you have the inputs and the different data points, you start working with the Excel workbook to model the different scenarios and then generate a web tool that now can be used by different stakeholders to interact. And then lastly, carry out other stakeholder events to disseminate the information, to identify what are the insights can we get from this, how can this tool be implemented into the decision-making process. So like I said, at the heart of KCERT 2050 was a community of practice through consistent stakeholder engagement. I don't think it's visible, but we have a breakdown of sample organizations by sector. So we have a pool of different sectors and actors from civil society, university, public administrators, with different levels of knowledge, to cover a wide spectrum of various knowledge and views on the carbon transition. So the next slide just shows the co-design and expert workshops, the different launch events that we had, as well as kickoff. And we had about 3 validation workshops just to ensure that the data that was collected by the sector leads make sense. So I will go straight into how the web tool works. So the main principles are behind the KCERT model. So it's an engineering-based scenario model. So what this means, it models Kenya's energy supply and demand by modeling physical units such as buildings, people, cars, power plants, and all that. And so once you have modeled how Kenya's economic aspects look in terms of energy supply and demand, you now have different characteristics and deployment for the use of different technologies. So these are the scenarios you're talking about. So if it's energy supply, you can configure the model to focus just on renewable energy while reducing the fossil fuel reliance, or reducing and increasing demand of fossil fuels, and etc. So the user is allowed to choose different characteristics, deployments, and use of different energy technologies. The tool does not make economic-based assumptions about the way the behavior affects supply and demand. So it doesn't consider the economics of the world in terms of how that would affect energy supply and demand. So it measures the scenarios as is, and it doesn't optimize the energy system based on price or any other factor. So the tool at the moment, the Excel workbook does have allowances to be able to model the price of different technologies, so that maybe later on, if you want to look at the cost of moving from renewable to non-renewable and vice versa, you should be able to do that vis-a-vis while comparing the gains in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But this first phase, we just looked at capturing the greenhouse gas emissions. So more iterations of the tool will go to now assess the cost of how much each scenario would cost, so that you can do like a cost-based analysis. So the web tool is an interactive web interface. So on the left-hand side, you have the levers. And so each lever relates to a type of action to reduce emissions. So for example, under transport, you'd have levers for maybe increasing the use of public transport, reducing the use of combustion engines towards more electric vehicles, etc. So you have different levers. We had in our case 39 levers, which aggregate a total of 166 sub-levers. And these levers just adjust either lifestyle or sectoral decarbonization strategies. Under each lever, you have a level of ambition. So for the level of ambition, they rank from 1 to 4. If you can go to the next slide. So each level has 4 options from level 1 to 4, which the user selects, and they represent the full range of what is possible for an action up to 2050. So level 1 is the minimum or least effort that you can put in. Let's say if it's the rollout of electric vehicles, so level 1 would be the business as usual sort of effort, whereby you have some reduction in taxes in terms of bringing in electric vehicle cars. And then as you move up the levels to level 2, 3, and 4, level 4 could be putting in place policies that have every public transport system having an electrical engine or a hybrid engine. So that's how that works. And then in the middle over there, you have different graphs that show, I don't know if you can see that. Thomas, kindly move to, I think, 2 slides ahead. The next one. Next one, please. Yes, sorry, back. Slide 20.
This one or the previous one?
I'm on slide 20. So the previous one, like the previous three. If you can go back like 3 slides behind.
Ahead.
Hello, Thomas. I don't know if it's my end, but the slide hasn't changed.
So we are on how does it work?
Yeah. Where I'm describing the graphs.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think it has changed on my end, but it's okay. I can just continue. What I'm seeing is the one-pager description. So I don't know if that's what everyone else is seeing. Maybe it's just me.
We are seeing how does it work.
What's the sentence below? Oh, it's a graph.
It's showing the screenshot of the graph.
Okay, I think then my slides, my presentation is anyway. I can continue. So basically, you have graphs at the center there. So the graphs change for different views. So you have the overview of what are the annual greenhouse gas emissions, and then what is the primary energy consumption. And so what the graphs allow you is to explore the impact of different choices on greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption. So as you move up and down the different levels, you have you have changes in terms of whether it's increasing or decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions. And then at the right-hand side, you just have different alerts that show you either when all the levels are level ambition 4, just to alert the user that you're probably taking a very unrealistic approach, whether the level ambition start before the default start date, and then whether biomass imports have exceeded the maximum, and when you have insufficient land available for forestry and bioenergy. So how do you build your scenarios or your decarbonization pathways? So you have an option over there at the top of the pane. You can select example pathways or the illustrative net zero pathway. So that one will set all the levels and their corresponding level ambition to a selected level that aims to meet net zero by 2050. And then you can see what level of ambition for each lever is needed to reach net zero. Alternatively, you can just play around with a different configuration to build your own pathway by using the levers and their varying levels of ambition. And then lastly, we have one-page description. So these are the one-pagers for each sector and their ambition level choices. So they just explain what were the assumptions for each sector, what went into the modeling, what are the data sources, so that you can have 100% transparency in what is going on the tool. So the main outputs of KCERT, you have an overview, so which is the summary of energy and emissions, that gives you for the entire economic sector for the 6 sectors, what is the summary of the energy consumption. So what are the main types of energy technologies used? to meet demand, and then what is the overall greenhouse gas emissions. For the greenhouse gas emissions, what we modeled was CO2 equivalent, methane, and nitrogen oxide. And then under transport, we are looking at transport demand for the different types of technologies we have, whether it's people walking, cycling, matatus, what we call matatus here in Kenya, or public transport like buses and the mini buses. And then looking at different road engine technologies, so whether it's combustible engines, hybrids, or electrical engines. Under buildings, we looked at heat supply and demand. So for hot water, we focused on hot water because that's the main heat demand in buildings at the moment. For Kenya, the demand for cooling is mostly felt at the coast, so it's not that big enough. And the demand for heating is not that prominent because we are relatively tropical, so we don't have a lot of demand for heating. So the only demand we looked at in terms of heat supply was for heating hot water. And then we looked at non-buildings, both buildings and non-buildings, but we also looked at non-heat supplies in terms of cooling, appliances, and different cooking technologies in terms of what are the greenhouse gas emissions and technologies used to meet those demand. Under industry, we focused on three major industries in Kenya, which was the tea and sugar, the steel industry, so that's the iron and non-ferrous, and the cement. So looking at what is used for heat in those, or for energy in those three industries, and what does that imply in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions. Under CO2 removal and gases, so that module looks at the gas distribution in the country, looking at how hydrogen can be used to meet different types of demand, whether it's hydrogen in vehicles or hydrogen for cooking. But we also looked at different technologies for CO2 removal, whether it was weathering and all that, those new age technologies for removing CO2 from the air. Under electricity, we looked at majority the emissions from electricity generation, looking at what are our energy mix in the country and what is the emissions being felt from that area. And then lastly, under land use and bioenergy, we looked at how much land is currently used for forestry, what is the yield efficiency, that is the ratio between how much yield we get per hectare. We also looked at bioenergy, so growing different crops for bioenergy, domestic bioenergy production. And then lastly, you have imports, maps and flows. So it just summarizes how different energy imports and import dependencies flows in Kenya. So looking at the back end, so the web tool is based on an Excel model. So it's an Excel spreadsheet, which feeds to a more user-friendly web-based interface. So the Excel model captures all the inputs, outputs, and the different calculations needed to measure greenhouse energy supply and demand, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. Why Excel? Because Excel is easily available to everyone. I mean, most organizations have Microsoft 365 account, so it's easily accessible, and then the learning curve is not as steep because a majority of people have one form of way interacted with Excel and can be able to manipulate formulas and go in and do modeling from themselves. So we modeled each sector. So we took a sector-by-sector approach, covering different sectoral energy supply and demand in the Kenyan economy. And the main calculation was looking at what are the labor inputs, can we translate them into different profiles, and then apply a specific priority order, and then calculate the energy balance, which translates to energy consumption. And then from the energy consumption, we can calculate the greenhouse gas emissions based on the energy balance and the technological activity. And then lastly, kind of look at what capacity is required to satisfy demand. So who can use KCERT? So KCERT can mostly be used by governments looking to explore decarbonization strategies, using benchmarks from the tool to achieve net zero by 2050. It can be used to test and compare decarbonization strategies for developing and testing evidence-based policies, but also data management in terms of being a single source of data. It can also be used by NGOs to inform long-term strategies and campaigns, and then businesses can use the tool to inform long-term planning, to see what is the future of different sectors in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction and abatements. And then students can use it to discover the different impacts of mitigation options themselves. So in terms of what KCERT covers and what KCERT does not cover, so KCERT is a fully comprehensive and dynamic model. It can be extended to material use and production, and look at different societal, cultural, and behavioral levels, modeling them. But what it can do, number one, because it tries to balance between in-depth coverage, but also going in-depth into a sector, but also covering as many sectors as possible, it cannot provide a high resolution in space and time. So it models the annual emissions from 2015 as the base year to the year 2100, and then looks at the annual emissions across time in that way. And then in terms of space, it takes an aggregation of the whole country, and it doesn't go into detail in terms of the county or a sub-county or the ward level. So the data is aggregated at the county level, country level. The other thing is that scenarios are not forecasts, and so there's no specific likelihood attached to them. So like I said, this is an engineering-based, scenario-based models and not a statistical model. So the scenarios just show you a comparison between business as usual and level 1, 3, 4 type of ambition. Like I said, there's no cost optimization model, so you could have to use other tools for that. And then it doesn't look at the macroeconomic analysis, so it doesn't look at what is going on outside the country and how that would impact energy supply and demand. So like I said, there are many tools for modeling, KCERT being one of them. And so what KCERT does, it tries to balance the width and the depth of focus. So it covers 6 sectors to some adequate in-depth coverage. So it doesn't zone in on just one aspect, it tries to cover energy supply and demand across the 6 sectors. And then it tries to be as comprehensive as possible while also being transparent, user-friendly, and have a synthesis. So it sits sort of in the middle of this quadrant. So when compared to other modeling tools, you can use KCERT. So no one model can give you 100% of the story. So you have to use KCERT 2050 in collaboration with other types of models that can now give you more details where KCERT doesn't give you detail. So for KCERT, it allows you to explore the solution space. So you have about 161 levels in the Kenyan context with up to 4 different levels of ambition. So you have a solution space of 161 to the power of 4. So you can explore an infinite amount of different solutions with transparency and in a user-friendly way. And then you can select a scenario and then feed it into another optimization model, maybe to look at the cost implications, or you can even feed it into a sector-specific model to be able to zoom into a given sector to cover more detailed sectors, such as the PIPCA model or osmosis. So many models exist, more or less specific with their modeling forecast, and more or less transparent or open source. So KCERT tries to balance between being covering the energy system comprehensively, looking at the different interactions between sectors, but also being detailed enough in terms of different issues within the sector, and being transparent. So it sits sort of in the middle of that. So it is transparent in terms of the base model is based on Excel, so anyone can take the model, interact with it, play around with it. It's comprehensive enough to cover the energy system, while it goes into the key issues identified by the sector leads in the different stakeholder engagements that needed to be modeled. And then lastly, we looked at comparing the long-range energy alternatives planning system, which is LEAP, with KCERT. LEAP is being used currently in different sectors or different ministries in the government. So how can you use these tools together? So they're not there to fight with each other, but to complement each other. So with LEAP and KCERT, so KCERT, like I said, you have an infinite amount of solutions to explore. It's open source, so anyone with a Microsoft Office license can download the model, explore it, customize it for their own needs. While LEAP is not open source, so you can't really customize. You have to model your energy system to fit into the options that they have. The KCERT Excel model is highly customizable. So the base model is based on the Mackay carbon calculator for the UK. So we took that model, adapted it to the Kenyan context to fit what we needed in terms of the energy space for Kenya. And we are able to customize it that way. And we know that the first iteration is never enough. So there are going to be plenty of iteration going on with more customization. So how can you use both? KCERT is the best for grasping the solution space, designing different pathways, and assessing different policy questions. And then you can use those pathways to look at different optimization strategies using LEAP. Because LEAP does give energy system optimization options. So yeah, so that's it from me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Morethi, for the insight. I hope we are still active, and maybe I can encourage us to chat in the space that provided, so that we can answer any questions that you might have. I've already seen one question from Engineer Ngwenya, so we'll take it up after the next few slides. Dr. Ivan, let's jump over to the next section.
Yeah, thank you. So here I want to give an overview of the different sectors, and maybe that could help answer some of the questions. So as we had said, we had the electricity, building, transport, industry, land use, and the CO2 removal and gases sectors. Looking at the electricity sector, here our interest was basically to look at how the country's electricity is supplied. Yeah, jump to the slide on the electricity sector. I think these ones we've talked about. Yeah, we are looking at how we supply the electricity in Kenya. And we have the different technologies that we currently have, and the technologies that we foresee we would supply the electricity using. Looking at our policy planning, like the list calls power development plan, geothermal, or rather renewable energy sources are given preference, but we know that at one point or another, we need some fossil fuel based and maybe some imports. So the purpose here was to match these supplies in a way that we can reduce the carbon emissions in the sector. Next slide. So for instance, we took the 4 levers or the 4 ambition levels from L1 to L4. And for each of these, we were matching with the potential or how we can increase or decrease each of the levers. So for instance, if you look at the natural gas, at the base case or business as usual, we would start with around 2,500 megawatts, but it's expected to, we would say, for us to be very ambitious, then we'll not have any of that. Whereas for renewable energies, we expect us to increase that in the electricity supply. Next slide. Now, let's look at the building sector. Here, we are focusing on the emissions that are from the buildings during the use of the buildings. And looking at the main uses in the country, we are looking at the hot water, cooling, cooking, and the lighting and appliances. So we looked at both domestic and non-domestic buildings, the buildings that are mainly used for commercial uses. And the types of fuel that you are looking here were electricity. So we look at electricity used in buildings, bioenergy, fossil fuels like LPG, hydrogen, possibilities of having network heat and environmental heat, as well as losses, both due to conversion as well as due to distribution. So the building sector had 4 levers. If you may jump to the next. Yes, so the building sector had 4 levers. A lever for demand for hot water, another one for demand for cooking, lighting and appliances, as well as for cooling. And for us to identify the potential to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from each of these levers, then we were taking the energy consumption for each of the levers and then looking at the emission factors. And when you multiply those two, then you're able to get the potential GHG emissions. So if you reduce any of this, then that goes into the tool as the potential reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions. Now let's look at the next sector. And this is the transport sector. In the transport sector, we were mainly looking at the main transport systems in the country. So we have the road transport, we have the aviation, the rail, and the maritime sectors. So the key is to what can we do to reduce the emissions in these 4 sectors. Currently, you'll find that we are using either the gasoline, the aviation spirit, jet fuel, light and heavy diesel, as well as fuel oil to fuel our transport sector. So when looking at the levers for each of, for this sector, so that we identify how we can reduce the emissions, we are looking at the transport demand in the country, the domestic and the international aviation and how they are structured and the demand for fuel in those. Then we look at the light vehicles. So in the light vehicles, like the personal vehicles, you'll find we have the internal combustion engines, the ones that we currently have. We have the battery electric vehicles. They are starting to gain traction in the country. Plug-in hybrid vehicles, biofuel used in the vehicles, as well as hydrogen. We have the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Then for heavy vehicles, here we were interested in the ICE, the BEV, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, biofuel and hydrogen. And then we would go to the aviation, but specifically now look at the efficiency of the aviation sector, in terms of operations, as well as maybe substitution using the sustainable aviation fuels. Then in maritime, we were interested in the domestic and the international maritime, both in terms of fuel used and the efficiency. And then finally, we were looking at the rail transport, which uses a lot of diesel. Let's go to the next. So the next sector was the industry sector. And here, Dr. Betty had mentioned, we were mainly concerned with the industries that have a lot of emissions in the country. And when we look at the industry outlook, then the cement, the steel and non-ferrous, tea and sugar industries are the most predominant. Mind you, here in Kenya, we have what we call the energy management regulations that mandate all these industries to report to the regulator on their energy consumption and their efficiency. So here the levers were now on industry efficiency. How can we improve the efficiency in these industries in terms of energy consumption, especially looking at the thermal energy, because electricity supply takes mostly care of the electrical energy. Then shift to biomass from fossil fuel. Then the next one would be to incorporate carbon capture and storage. Then shift to electricity, where you use now electricity to provide your heating needs, and probably shift to gas also to provide their heating needs. On to the next sector. This was on land use, bioenergy, and waste sector. So this was mainly concerned with how we use our land. So for instance, we had the lever on farming yield efficiency, where you are looking at how can we improve the efficiency of what we are doing with our farms, you know, things like livestock as well as crop, or rather, crop management. Then the next one was on forestry. Can we increase our forest cover? And of course, there is competition. We can't have the forest cover go beyond a certain level because, again, we still have to take care of human needs. So can we reduce deforestation? Can we reduce forest degradation so that they continue acting as our carbon sinks? And then can we use some of the land to produce bioenergy, with this bioenergy being used in some of the sectors that we've talked about in earlier? And can we reduce our wastes and probably recycle or divert the waste to other uses like to energy production? The next sector, which is the last sector, is on CO2 removal and gases sector. So this sector is highly concentrating on upcoming technologies, or let's call them new technologies globally. So with the intention to reduce the CO2 that is emitted. And the technologies we are looking at are on hydrogen. So this can be green hydrogen, whereby we are generating from renewable energy sources, or blue hydrogen, where now we are considering maybe use some fossil fuels or biomass. But then once you use fossil fuels, you generate CO2. But since we want to reduce this CO2 that is emitted, then we use other technologies like carbon capture and storage, so that then you capture that carbon and store it, and it's not released to the environment. And it can be biohydrogen, where you are using biomass to generate as the source of your hydrogen. Then the other technology we're looking at was carbon capture and storage. If it can be incorporated in various sectors, then we had direct air capture, and finally enhanced weathering. So on this, we had 4 main levers, with the first one looking at the use of biomethane. But then this one we were looking at, can we have biogas used in domestic uses? Then the next one was on hydrogen gas share. So this one is, can we have hydrogen being used maybe to power some of the industrial uses? It can be imported, it can be from methane, but we say if you use methane, then we use carbon capture and storage. Similarly, if you use biomass, again, we incorporate with biomass with carbon capture and storage, and then we can also use local renewable energy to generate the hydrogen and get the green hydrogen. Then we can have bioconversion, where we take various materials, for example, methane, then we do gasification, but then we have to incorporate carbon capture and storage so that we don't release it to the environment. We can also incinerate the waste so that we generate energy, or use liquid biofuel, get liquid biofuel from some of the waste that is thrown into landfills. And then the fourth one and the last one was looking at how can we remove the gases from the air? So we can use direct air capture, which again is a nascent technology. I think in the country, we have one company that is trying to develop this and targeting to do it next year. And we can also do enhanced weathering, where you have rocks of a certain chemical composition absorb the CO2 directly from the air. The last one could be afforestation, but then this one was covered under the land use sector. Thank you so much for your time. I think, Tom, you can take it up from here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ivan. I think that was the overview of the sector. Now, I would like to invite David Orr to maybe give us a brief overview on how we can get involved. How can we build our own calculators and what support is there?
Yeah, Tristan. So there are 3 key ways to get involved, and you can see them on the screen here. So if we move from left to right, so we've got a very active calculator community, and this goes back to the 60 countries that already have an existing calculator program. So they share ideas, they share advice, they can posit certain questions, say, we're struggling with this sector. Has anyone got any suggestions? And it's been really cool to see how this has been developed. And so, for example, we've seen Canada is interested in building their own calculator, and a few months ago we had a conference, and it was great to see the Nigerian team, for example, talking with the Canadian team about how they could build it further. So that's certainly a great place to go if you're interested in getting involved and seeing all sorts of other people who are there and can help provide advice and support to build it out further. In the middle here, you've got the really detailed guide. So this is many years in the making, and it's an accessible. It's been written in a way that's tried to be as concise as possible to ensure that anyone who has access to spreadsheet functionality can build what is ultimately a really meaningful and impactful tool. So the How to Build a Calculator guide, these links will be shared after this presentation as well. So you can have a look there. And it goes step by step, right from the start, about the teams you need to develop, how you bring all this information together, where to look for data, and then how to actually go about building it. And then if you want to see examples of other countries' calculators, so India's, Kenya's, of course, if you look at Thailand's, there's plenty out there. Then the Imperial College London website is the store for all that information. I think it's worth saying as well that the UK government funded this program. This program comes to an end in the next couple of months, but that's not to say that it's that you can't build a calculator. I think this guide provides a very clear step-by-step approach to being able to construct and advise on how you can make this a reality. So providing that, however you're interested in developing this, there's a trusted method that over 60 countries have used already. And if there is funding from a particular source, then we would be very happy to explore that with you and to explore how it can be taken forward. And so I think it's just worth stressing that this is very much something that can be done. It takes a bit of time, of course, is getting the team together, but it can be done in around 8 to 9 months, and you can have something which is just super impactful in terms of driving down carbon and supporting the net zero transition. So these links will be shared, but yeah, great way to get involved to start with. I might suggest that you post something in the 2050 calculator community, see where it goes, and then if you're interested in the more detailed nitty gritty, then the other 2 resources here can support with that as well. But I believe we've got a few questions in the chat. So yeah, Tom, are you happy to field these?
Yep. So once again, thank you, David. I'll encourage all of us to maybe post any questions that you might have on the chat. And if there are more, I can probably ask the organizers to unmute you and you can ask. But other than that, I think that is all we had to cover. So maybe we can dive into the Q&A. I'm seeing 2 questions so far from Engineer Danny. So first one, maybe Ivan can help us to answer. So what are the sources of data? That is, where does one get the data from when you're using the tool?
Thanks, Tom.
Yes.
Now, what we were doing was to make good use of mainly the the publicly published data within the country, and of course here I'm going mostly to talk about Kenya. For instance, if you are looking at the electricity sector, you'll find that we have the planning documents that are published by, say, the Ministry of Energy. For example, we have what we call the least cost power development plan, which I think now we have one from around 2022 to 2041, which lists, how the country intends to progress the current generation and probably how we are prioritizing other electricity generation sources coming to the future. And you'll find for us, that's the tool like now that was being used to consider energy storage, like battery energy storage and pumped hydro, which could help to probably get rid of some of the diesel power plants that we have that are generating electricity. If you look at, say, the industry sector, this one as I said, we have regulations that necessitate high energy consumers in the country to report to the energy regulator on their energy consumption and how they intend to increase their efficiency of energy utilization. So basically conduct what we call energy audits once every 3 years. So the regulator has a lot of that data, and therefore the regulator is able to know which industrial sectors consume a lot of energy, and therefore which industrial sectors do we need to focus on as a country. We also have other sources of data, like now the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics produces statistics every half a year and every year. And this also was very useful. The transport sector, we have the Ministry of Transport having lots of data. We also have what you call the National Transport and Safety Authority that registers all the vehicles. Then you go to like the civil aviation. We have the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority as the regulator. We have the regulator for the marine transport, and we were using all these agencies now to try and get the different sets of data that were required. I hope I've answered that question satisfactorily.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Muremi. So as maybe to reiterate, we were working with government. So the Ministry of Energy was the coordinator. We were just assisting them in bringing all this up together. So accessing data was quite easy, and everything was as supplied from the source. Maybe to the next one, maybe you can have Dr. Betsy tackle this. I don't know if you're still on. The question is on, is KCERT a simulation kind of tool or a real-time tool? And also, how reliable, valid, and durable is a tool or a calculator? The other question still from Enoch is on what is the basic assumption used to develop the calculator? Well, maybe I can attempt to answer this. So it is reliable because, one, we took the business as usual kind of overview from 2015. So 2015, we were able to get all the data that will be needed to model the emissions for each and every sector as is. Then now we projected, if we left things as is, what will be the emissions by 2050. Then now the levers that we are proposing are in line with what are the proposed policy interventions, as well as what are the existing policy interventions that will drive decarbonization. So they are just projections to see how the emissions can be reduced using the tool. I also see that my colleague, Dr. Lukuru, is in the call, and maybe you can give him a chance to tackle that question as well as the one on simulation.
Okay, thank you very much. Am I able to unmute? I can also even move the video if possible. I can show the video so people can see my face. I wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Okay. Very well. Unable to start video. Okay, very well. So just a quick one. So it's not a simulation kind of a tool. So it's real. And the scenario is at the moment we are working towards the real time. So what we have today is what's based on already what we've developed and what has been collected from the government agencies, as Dr. Marine has just explained. But the future of this tool, as Betsy was mentioning, the future iteration is to make it real time, such that the data collected by the government agencies are deposited somewhere in a data lake, in a data warehouse, and all that is connected straight away to the calculator. So the future where we are going is to have the whole entire tool being real time. As you collect a data set on transport, on electricity, on energy, the same way the tool will be already utilizable. Is it reliable? Exactly. This is what we are pushing people to use. It is reliable. Policymakers, anybody's trying to look at what you want to make, decision you want to make based on carbon calculation. This is the tool we are proposing will be worthwhile for you to utilize. So it's not something maybe you are just imagining it will happen. No, we are pushing and requesting. Now as Kenyans, we hope the region can pick up Tanzania, Uganda, such that your data-driven policies can be able to go through this as at now. And then you come to what basic assumptions are we trying to make through here? Now, you realize the assumptions are very few, if there are any, because at the end of the day, it's just like what we are having, it's data already collected. So what you're saying is today at the base level, level 0, what's happening? That's the status quo that we're saying is going to be. Level 4 is when we're saying now is the highly ambitious level that maybe you can be able to achieve as a government, as maybe a policy maker. So the thing is that for each and every level you're moving is what you're trying to say, what level of ambition are you be able to project? What I just want to emphasize here is the tool is to promote data-driven policy making. Time has now elapsed for us to be making decisions based on intuition, based on gut feeling, based on what we think. Now we want to support this with data, and that's why the tool is there. So we're saying if we are going to go e-bicycles, e-buses, e-transport, whatever it could be, what is the impact we are making in our planet when it comes to carbon emission? And the data will show that. So that's something that maybe we've been happy to say that the tool is helping us to achieve. And hopefully, when we get to real time, everybody will come be able to achieve that. We are working on the other part of the calculator, which we are calling the My 2050, such that now we can transfer these skills to the classroom. Get the students, get the university students plus high schools to start learning their contribution to the carbon emission. So we are developing a similar type of a calculator, but now for the teaching purposes. So this is what will support. So when these fellows graduate and they come to the real life scenario, they are working either private or public sector, they already know what is entailed, and they will just continue utilizing the calculator in their decision-making process. Thanks, Thomas, back to you. I think Betsy dropped off. She was in Gigiri, so she's trying to transit to somewhere else, to another meeting in the class, I think. Sawa, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lukuru, for that. I'll still encourage us to maybe give more questions in case there are any. Engineer Danny, are you okay now, or you still have a question? In case to Enoch. And I also would like to apologize. We've slightly over time, but I think it's worthwhile. We've been able to cover all the sections and also had ample time, and still having ample time for the question. All right, then if there is no other question, perhaps I can invite Professor Da Silva to give his remarks as he closes out the session. Just remember, we'll share with you the recording as well as the presentation. I'll include all our contacts. So in case you would like to engage further on this matter, you'll be able to write to us directly or even give us a call. Thank you. Let's welcome Prof. Da Silva. Prof, are you there?
You might be struggling to unmute. It took me a while to get unmuted. When you don't have the power for unmuting.
No worries. Then maybe I can give you the honors, Dr. Lukuru, to close for us.
Just give him a few seconds. I hope because he was around, I thought so. In fact, he invited me to join in. So let me just give him a few minutes. Professor Israel, yes, he's unmuted. Now, let's see. Maybe now he's trying to get
John, I am here.
Yes, I knew you are going through the same challenge I went through.
Yeah. Sorry.
Very well, Prof. You can tell them the difference between NATO and Nazi.
Yeah.
And what the calculator does for that.
They already know. So really, I think I have very little to say, but one thing that is clear, I am very happy with the work we've been doing with Imperial College, with the calculator, the opportunities that we've been offered, the training that we managed to do. Together with the government, for non-government people, from people in the counties. So not county, etc., but in the country. So I have never before worked so close and in good partnership with the government as with this project. So my thanks go to Peter Tabora, goes to Paul, goes to David Muthik, it goes to Engineer Kiva, and everybody in the government who have been giving us a great support for that. So I just wish to say that this project, by its very nature, has no end. It keeps growing, keeps involving more and more people, and creating more interest. For instance, the open source tool, the Energy Access Explorer, is an opportunity that is always there to help us to train people. In fact, this is one of the things that we want to give it, put it in the syllabus of this Masters in Sustainable Energy Transition that we are giving here in our university. So thank you so much. It is a materialization of a good practice when you put together private sector, academia, and government. Thank you all.
Very good, Prof. And this being our friends from Tanzania, just maybe to add what you've said, they're just our good neighbors here. We are happy to help them more than the way we did for Nigeria. Nigeria is very far away, and we really gave them all our support to get their calculator moving. So we'll be very happy to just cross over the border. I live next to Namanga, so I'll just walk through and I'll be in Arusha. And we'll see how we can be able to do things together. Thank you very much.
Most welcome, and thank you very much for this meeting. I've been out for it a couple of minutes and I came back because I was in another meeting. I'm sorry, but this is the reality. But I'm very happy that we are working as a team and getting results.
Kwaheri. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Engineer Thomas Bund, who has started the master's.
There's a comment down there.
Yes, we can see
There's
the comment. Yes, Meshach, it would work well. Yeah, I fully agree with you. Yes, you can go through the issue. Then we will be able to, again, happy to join through. I'm sure, I don't know if they gave you the whole history. I hope Onesimus did. I remember when he came and spoke to Prof, and then they had to go talk to the government. It began as just an idea that people later on now implemented. So same to you. And I'm sure David and the rest of people like to support. They'll want also Tanzania to pick their own and to be done by Tanzanians. If we come, we are just supporting. So everything is taken up by Tanzanians. We can use a university in Tanzania and we work together, support you, and you take it up through. So take your time, Meshach. We just wish you the best. Sisi tuko hapa tukusaidia. Hatuna mengi. Asante.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you and have a good day, everyone.